And it's happenstance that I all of obviously all of us didn't know there was going to be a war, and that this morning I have Jimmy Tabor here, who is the North American director of the Abraham Fund Initiatives, and he is. I might have to pause as I let people in here. Keep going back and forth. So he joined the Abraham Initiatives in 2018. He spent 5 years with the New Israel Fund. That would be interesting to hear about. Before that, he worked in Jerusalem for the JDC's, and I'm not sure what that is, and I didn't look it up, Center for International Migration and Integration. So you'll have to tell us what that is. Jimmy studied critical theory and social justice at Occidental College in Los Angeles and received an MBA from Brandeis University's Heller School of Social Management. Excellent program. Originally from Portland, he lives in the quintessential other Jewish capital, New York City, with his wife, Rabbi Mira Smearing, and their 2 kids. So before I go, let's see here. I am going to... There we go. Jimmy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it. When we planned this last spring, we had a very different idea what we'd be talking about today. We've been very much focused on the current Israeli government, the efforts for judicial overhaul, the impact of that on relationships between Jewish and Arab citizens, all of that, and everything's kind of been turned on its head. So I'm finding during these last terrible 3 weeks that the most important thing to do is just be with people and be in relationship with people. And so I'm hoping today what I'll do is tell you a little bit about how the situation, the current environment is affecting our work at the Abraham Initiatives, a little bit of background about the organization generally, and then about how we're responding to the crisis. But I really, hope that this can be a place where we can just have open discussion, ask questions, talk, kind of see where we end up. I think it would be helpful first just to say a little bit about what the Abraham Initiatives is, and what the Shared Society field is in Israel, for those that don't know. The Abraham Initiatives, we are one of the oldest organizations working on building relationships between Jewish and Arab citizens in Israel. So all of our work takes place within Israel, within the Green Line, and it's all with Israeli citizens. As many of you may know, 20% of the population of Israel is non-Jewish, are Arab, and they are full Israeli citizens. But as it plays out in most cases, in most areas, there are differences in the way that they experience that citizenship. There's structural inequality.
Right, Jimmy, I'm going to just stop you when you use a term. Can we have a quick review on what is the Green Line?
Okay, so this is the area that does not include the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The pre-1967 borders, where everyone who lives within that, Jerusalem's a little complicated, it's split, but everyone within that is a citizen of Israel. So those that live in Gaza and the West Bank who are not Jewish, or there's Jews who live in the West Bank who are Israeli citizens, but those that are non-Jewish in those places, they don't have Israeli citizenship, and they live under a different legal system and circumstances. So we're dealing within Israel proper with Israeli citizens. But what we're really working to do is to try and bridge the gaps between the experience of citizenship between Jewish and Arab citizens. It starts with the education systems in Israel that are segregated. Jewish children and Arab children go to separate schools. It has to do with how services are delivered. The way that the government provides services to citizens there's gaps between what Jews receive and what Arabs receive. And then also around representation. There's formally, Arab citizens have the right to be represented politically, in business and education and all these different places, but it doesn't always happen. There's sort of structural barriers that they get in the way. So that's sort of what the Abraham Initiatives does, broadly speaking. And these last 3 weeks have just been, in talking to people, I've sort of found that there's, no words to describe how terrible it's been. And there's also not enough words, to really capture the experiences that we've had. As an organization, we are a fully integrated organization, and we're trying internally to model the type of society we're trying to build in Israel. So we have, in Israel, co-directors, one Jewish, one Arab, and then sort of all the way down through the organization at the programmatic level, there's partnership between Jewish staff and Arab staff. And the experiences that people have had have just been horrendous. I mean, I think all of us here may be more familiar with the experiences that our Jewish colleagues have had, with family members or close friends or their children's friends who have been killed or kidnapped or now serving, been called up and are serving, within the last few days inside the Gaza Strip. And then for our Arab colleagues, which may be less familiar to us, like our Arab co-director, as last I spoke with him, 11 family members have been killed in Gaza. And I have colleagues who, live in Bedouin communities in the Negev that do not, Bedouin communities in the Negev that do not have access to shelters or sirens or protection from the Iron Dome, where members of their community have been killed. Am I freezing? It's a little choppy on my end.
Yeah, you're freezing a little bit, but you're okay. I think everybody knows what the Iron Dome is, but can you explain a little bit about how it works and why the Bedouin wouldn't be covered by it? Okay, now you're frozen. Hopefully, it looks like there he is. You were really frozen.
He's still frozen on my screen.
Yeah, he is. I'm going to tell him to log off and log back on. Yeah, that's what he's going to do. Okay. So I'm sure I hope he'll be right back with us. Here he is.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Let me try that this way.
Yeah.
So sorry, I was just saying, the experience of Arab colleagues has been, equally, but differently horrendous, with our co-director has lost, so far 11 family members in Gaza. I have colleagues and live in the Negev, Bedouin communities that are not protected by the Iron Dome. They don't have access to shelters or sirens. And then Arab colleagues in other parts of the country who are afraid to send their children outside because there's a great deal of tension and fear around sort of reprisal attacks inside of Israel.
Yeah.
And so
I had asked, can you just review how the Iron Dome works and why the Bedouin are not covered?
Yeah, so the Iron Dome, I think many of us know, it's the missile protection system in Israel that can pinpoint when a missile is launched where it's projected to land. And if it's in a populated area, the system is activated and it goes up and it destroys the missile before it lands. In the Bedouin community, and this gets to sort of some of the structural inequality, there are a large portion of the communities there are not recognized by the state. So they're not connected to things like water and power and these sorts of things. And as a result, when the state has their maps of the populated areas, they're not included, despite the fact that tens of thousands of people live there. They're technically unpopulated land. And so when a missile's coming and projected to land there, the Iron Dome system views it as like an open space. And as a result, people are in great danger. I have a colleague that this past week, a missile destroyed a house 4 doors down from her. And it's just, this is the sort of the reality that they're living in. And so, for us as an organization, that's committed to this idea of shared society and equality within Israel, we find ourselves in this really challenging situation where, first, how do you keep people in relationship with each other when the trauma that they're experiencing is very different, but it's in the same set of circumstances and can feel at times as sort of threatening to the other's experience. If I think we feel that often, that there's a push and pull. Like, we want our suffering to feel legitimate, and sometimes it feels like acknowledging the suffering that others are feeling somehow threatens that. And then the sort of the subsequent challenge as an organization is then how do we figure out how to speak with one voice, right? We have a lot of work to do right now. We are being called upon by many players in Israeli society for advice and, recommendations and, what to do. How do we come together to be able to figure out how to speak in one voice? So we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, towards the end, but that's just sort of setting the stage for where things are organizationally for us. Vanessa, does it make sense? I can kind of go into a little bit of background about the organization, what we do,
Please,
what we
yes.
may have talked about, 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I just think it's helpful context to, understand sort of how we're responding and how we're positioned in our response.
I mean, I do hope everyone realizes that when I called you, we were talking about the protests in Israel, protests in the United States, and we are so far afield. We could never have imagined this situation, and we appreciate you coming and, talking to us. So please tell us about the organization.
Okay. So, as I said, Abraham Initiatives, we work in the shared society field. The organization's gone through, transformation over the 34 years that it's existed, which I think is like it's important to understand how the field has shifted. So when the organization was started in 1989, this was right before the Oslo period started. The founder of the organization, someone named Alan Slifka, who's American, based in New York, he sort of recognized that no one was really paying attention to the relationship between Jews and Arabs in Israel, and that this is something that seems like an important thing to work on. You have 20% of the population, behooves the country that they feel included and not excluded. And moving into the Oslo period, really the focus of the organization was on this model that was very, very much in vogue at the time. It's called the contact theory of coexistence. And the idea, the thinking then was, if you can get Jews and Arabs together basically in a room to build relationships and see each other's common humanity, then those relationships will sort of spin out into greater society and it will lead to peace, right? Which is a nice idea. So the organization was an American organization sitting in New York, providing grants for all these small groups that were doing this sort of thing. When the Oslo process fell apart and the Second Intifada started, the field just imploded. It became clear very quickly that those relationships weren't strong enough to be sustained in moments like what we have actually right now, of extreme polarization, hostilities. For the Jewish side, the Second Intifada with the bus bombings was, really what provoked this rupture. On the Arab side, there was sort of the foundational cleavage happened in October of 2000, where 13 Arab citizens were killed by the police in peaceful demonstrations. And, what came out of that was a recognition within Israeli society that the structural inequality between citizens is untenable. And this came out of a report. There's a commission after the October events that was trying to really understand how could things go so wrong. This was the conclusion. And as an organization, the Abraham Initiatives made a shift to first becoming a fully Israeli organization. So now, we have 25 staff members on the ground in Israel. There's myself and a couple others abroad that do the education and fundraising work. But most critically, what the organization shifted is into moving into doing our own programs. And the model that we adopted is something we call advocacy through action. And the idea is that, building relationships between people to change attitudes is important, but it can never be successful when people are meeting like this. Right? You need to create a context where people are meeting on equal footing. And the only real way to do that within Israeli society is to provoke broad structural change, to facilitate equality. What that means is, as an organization, we spend our time as sort of a test laboratory where we're building pilot programs and policy recommendations that we test on the ground. And then once we have a proof of concept, they've been evaluated and shown to be successful, we pass them off to government ministries or universities or other large institutional partners that, when it comes down to it, they're the ones who are actually responsible for this in Israeli society. We have the freedom to try things, but then once it works, we push them to adopt it and scale it. So I'll just provide one one example, that's sort of, it's now coming to the end of this process. I mentioned before that, one of the foundational pieces or, drivers of inequality in Israel is the segregated education systems. In Israel, Jewish children, Arab children don't go to school in the same systems. There is exceptions to this. There's a small network of bilingual, binational schools called the hand-in-hand schools, which are phenomenal. That's the gold standard. But the challenge is, there's only, 6 or 8 of them in the whole country because they haven't been able to get broad buy-in. There's a conventional wisdom in Israel that separate, we know better than this because of our experience, but separate but equal is what people want. That both Jews and Arab parents, they don't want their kids to go to school together. They don't want them to meet each other. They don't want them to date each other. They don't want them to lose their languages. And this is just the way it should be.
I also think, though, that you have to tell everyone that you can also decide if you're Jewish to go to Chiluni, which is secular school, or Dati. So it's even further segregating the Israeli community. And and again, I would say they don't want them to date each other. They don't want them to, I don't know if the Dati schools, if some of them are in Yiddish or not. That's not what we're talking about today, but that segregation is just so, it permeates through all, yes.
Absolutely. And so, for us, the question is, if hand in hand is working from this direction to create an integrated system, is there a way that we can work from this way to start to poke holes in the assumptions that both parents have and the Ministry of Education have about the way education should work? So about 7 or 8 years ago, we started a partnership with Queen's University in Belfast. They adopted a model 25 years ago. They developed this after the Good Friday Agreement was signed to deal with the fact that in Northern Ireland, it was a similar situation. You have Catholic schools, you have Protestant schools. Conventional wisdom is kids shouldn't be learning together. They felt like that this is something that needed to shift. So they developed this model. It's called shared learning. And the idea is that you need to create the expectation throughout society that children will be learning at least one core curriculum subject together each week. And we have sort of the added challenge in the Israeli context that kids are coming in with different languages. So we ended up settling on English as the subject because it sort of equally disadvantages both groups of kids. And 7, 8 years ago, we launched this with 5 pairs of schools just to get a feel for it. We brought the Ministry of Education in at the beginning. They helped us develop the curriculum. The second year, we moved to 10 schools. They start matching teacher salaries. We received a major grant from USAID to expand to 20 pairs of schools, and then go embark on a 2-year evaluation process where we were able to demonstrate what you'd hope, right? Kids' attitudes change. When they're in relationship with each other, they start to view the other differently. But for our purposes, remember, we want this to be adopted. We were able to show that kids perform better on their English exams when they're learning in an integrated environment, which is critical, to be able to go to the ministry and say, actually, for educational outcomes, integration is the way to go. So we got these results, right before May of 21, which, if you'll remember, that was the last conflict with Gaza, where there was an explosion of violence within Israel, in Israel's mixed cities. It was horrific. It was driven by young people. It really shook the foundation of Israeli society. And we were able to go to the Akko municipality, which is a mixed city in northern Israel, and the Gilboa Regional Council, which is a mixed region. It's Afula is a part of it, if you know that. It's sort of on the way to Tiberias. It's a collection of Jewish and Arab villages and towns that are underneath this regional umbrella. And we said to them, basically, we've had this rupture. Like, here's something tangible that can be done to try and repair the impact. And both of those places fully adopted the project. So last year, in the 22-23 school year, every single 8th grader in Akko and Gilboa was learning English together. And then right before the government shifted, the Ministry of Education formally adopted the program model. So now, as an organization, the Abraham Initiatives, we are, instead of running the project, this year we're training the ministry staff to be able to administer the project themselves. And as a part of the adoption, they allocated enough funding to expand to 200 additional pairs of schools on the way to starting to fully roll this out. So we do this in the education field. We do this around equitable service delivery. Before the last 3 weeks, it was mainly focused on violence within Arab communities in Israel, access to life-saving services. Policing is a major problem. As I mentioned, the bomb shelters, sirens, all of this, access to fire safety, fire stations, all that sort of thing. And then around equal representation. And again, a month ago, this was really focused on integrating Arab citizens into the pro-democracy movement as a part of the protests. How critically important that is in terms of the political future of Israel, to have a shared political future, essentially. So that's sort of big picture what we do, which brings me, I think, to the last piece that I'll talk a little bit about before we open up, which is, what's the role of an organization like ours in this moment of crisis in Israel? There's the sort of reactive side of things, which is a lot of it is working with different service delivery organizations within Israel that may not have the experience or access in Arab society that we do, that we can help facilitate. So, we're working very closely with the Home Front Command and the IDF around how to protect all Israeli citizens. Just a couple days ago, the state was so bad in terms of what Home Front Command actually knew about these Bedouin communities that they asked us to provide them with a map with specific GPS coordinates of where the mobile bomb shelters needed to be placed. So that's something that we've been working with them on. We also are consulting with the Ministry of Education, with principals, municipal education departments, for how do we bring students back, as schools start to come back together, both in places where students are learning together, but also where they're apart. How can we disrupt? For everyone, this is a radicalizing moment, right? It's just it totally undermines everyone's sense of security and self. And so how can we help have a productive direction for young people that doesn't back people into corners? And then also around employment, we work with a lot of employers for how do this is one of the real success stories of Israel is the integration of Arab citizens into the workforce. But at these moments, it becomes really challenging. There's the potential for friction. So we're working with folks there. But the really big piece of what we're doing is proactive. Everyone in Israel remembers, for better or worse, the experience of May of 21, the violence, the potential for violence within Israeli cities, especially mixed communities, when there's conflict beyond Israel's borders. And what we're seeing sort of outside of the organization, what we're seeing both is an increase in incitement to violence among extremists that are looking to sort of capitalize on the situation to drive their own agenda, but also at the same time, an explosion of grassroots efforts where people are coming together to try to bring Jews and Arabs together in their communities to present a different possibility, right? And so what we've launched this emergency project where we're hiring coordinators from within mixed communities in Israel to stitch together, based on our experience working in these communities, stitch together the grassroots efforts that are popping up with the municipalities and the education systems and the police force, basically all the different components of these local communities that are necessary to present a strong, united front that says we don't want violence in our communities. We believe that our future here is together despite everything that's happening. We received a $200,000 grant from UJA Federation of New York's emergency campaign, which to me is just phenomenal, that as they're sending tens of millions of dollars to Israel for emergency needs, that they recognize there are immediate needs on the Gaza border, there are needs of people that are displaced, there are needs of the military, but there's also needs to strengthen the fabric of Israeli society in these moments of tension. And so that's allowed us to hire coordinators in 5 of the mixed cities, which are the ones we're focused on first are Akko, Haifa, Jaffa, it's southern Tel Aviv, Ramla, and Lod, and then also in the Gilboa Regional Council. And in total, we've identified about 15 to 20 mixed cities that are becoming more mixed, and mixed regions that really would benefit from this type of an intervention right now. And this is where our focus is. It's how can we take sort of the pain and suffering that we're all experiencing. I talk about this a little bit because everybody, myself included, we all feel at a loss right now. And I think for us as an organization, one of the real challenges is that we sort of occupy the space where, as a organization, as a community, we unequivocally condemn and are, horrified, and there's not enough words to describe what happened, the atrocities that happened on October 7th, the hands of Hamas, right? And at the same time, we also recognize the injustice of the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza, who are just innocent bystanders that are, it's just intolerable, the level of suffering they're experiencing as a result of this conflict. And so the question is, for us, is how can we create a vision for Israeli society that moves beyond this or that, that creates, a future where we really are living together. And we believe that that's a stronger Israeli society moving forward. Even if the space for that feels small right now, it's how can we carve that out as large as possible to create an alternative as we move out of this period. So,
Well, I think it gives us a good idea of what you're doing, and full transparency. We're going to have you back when it's not wartime. But first, I'm going to open up to questions. You can raise it. I really can't see you. Well, I guess I can, or put it in the chat. Putting it in the chat is always good, because I can only see a couple of you right now. I wanted to ask, until somebody asks a question.
Your privilege as a leader.
Right. How is everyone in the office getting along? Because, your colleague who lost 11 people, I'm sure you have other Jewish Israelis who, their kids are in Miluim, reserves. They're, if they had family on kibbutz in the South. So how is that working?
It's like extraordinarily difficult. I mean, it's like, it's like I said, it's like we're trying to model internally what we're trying to do externally. And, the first 3 or 4 days after the attacks was really spent just trying to keep people in relationship with each other, because people's suffering is so different. And, one thing that's been really important is there's like a zero tolerance policy within the organization for rumors. There's so much on social media, and we obviously have like a very active WhatsApp in the organization, and there's just like, you can't share anything or go off on things that are not verified, which is
WhatsApp. For those who may not know, WhatsApp is, you can use it as a texting platform. You can call. It's all free. I highly recommend it if you have family or friends in Israel. That's the best way, I think, to get a hold of them. But you can also put in pictures and news articles. And so is your WhatsApp in English? I mean, do people?
It's going between 3 languages, actually. It's just kind of cool. But yeah, internally as a staff, it's just been like, how do we make sure that people are being checked in on? How do we make sure that we're creating spaces for people to listen to each other and express the really deep pain that they're feeling that may feel uncomfortable to others, and hold that space? And then also, one of the things that within the organization very early, there was a message very clearly that, if you need to check out for a few hours, a few days, like, if it's totally fine, you just let people know. We'll pick each other up, and try and figure out how to move forward together. But it's raw. I mean, it's just really is like, sometimes people are doing better, sometimes they're doing worse. And there's really no easy answers right now.
Yeah. And I think because we don't have, they're going in on the ground today. And of course, in America, we have an 8-hour news lag. And it's not like a war has an end time, but this really just has no end time. And I think we should also preface that, I don't know about the Arab kids, but the Jewish Israelis were out of school for the Chagim, and now are out of school because of the war. So you have all of these kids out of school. You have the Miluim, they've been called up to reserves and sitting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And I just can't imagine that type of mental tension and pressure among the whole society.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think for my experience, it's just that it's like, as terrible as the previous rounds of conflict with Gaza have been, there's kind of a routine to it. There's an off ramp, there's a clear off ramp. And now it feels like there's no clear off ramp, which just ratchets things up to an intolerable level.
I don't know if you know this, but do you think the schools will be back in session anytime soon?
I think it depends on the part of the country. I know, and I just know this anecdotally, that
Yeah.
colleagues in Haifa said that their kids were going back the middle of last week.
Okay.
But it's not clear how many parents are doing that.
Yeah.
And, obviously things could change quickly on the northern front. So
Yes.
yeah, it's really, really tough.
Um, what do you think are going to be some of your short-term goals as we move forward in this changed landscape the world has just changed around us?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, everything in the immediate term is focused on preventing violence in the mixed cities. We saw last night, I don't think it made it through in the news here, but there was a big confrontation at the dorms in a college in Netanya.
I actually saw that, and if you can tell everybody about it, my stomach just sank when I saw that.
So
Tell everybody a little bit about it.
yeah, I would hesitate. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't seen verified what provoked it. There was some sort of conflict between students in the dorm and a synagogue, and the police got involved, and the dorms were surrounded. And it blew up on social media where, extremists on both sides are calling for, we need to like drive the Arabs out of Netanya in order to protect ourselves. And the Arabs, are talking about how, that the Jewish extremists are coming out of the synagogues to attack them and they have them surrounded. And I don't actually know, I can't speak with authority what happened, but I can speak about the impact of that, which is that, everyone is so on edge that it's just like, it's just like a match could blow things up. This is just in this community, but it's a similar thing. We're seeing on college campuses, universities, where students are being, they're initiating expulsion proceedings for people for posting on social media. Also in workplaces, people have lost their jobs. Um, you know, it just feels like everybody is ready to explode. So for us, it's how can we lift up the efforts that are bringing people together, and also working with the authorities so that they understand to pause before acting and really take stock of the situation.
Here's an article from Times of Israel about it if you want to look into it. Arthur has a good question. Before this current event, how receptive was the government to some of your programs? And what percent of Israeli citizens, Arab and Druze, Bedouin, were receptive to your program?
This is a really good question. So, just to provide a little bit of context, we have experience working with, before this last government, I'll say, before the last, year, we had experience working across governments, like a lot of success having programs adopted, in the previous 12 years of Netanyahu, but the government in between, that for the first time in Israel's history included a party representing Arab citizens within the governing coalition. It was a really different situation where we had ministers and deputy ministers who we were close to that were calling us in to actively problem solve around issues of violence in Arab society, the education system, mixed cities, all this sort of thing. It really, that year and a half of that government was like, or for us, was a race to get as much adopted as possible. And also, the reason for this is because in Israel, there's traditionally a very firm line between the civil service within the government ministries and the elected, appointed political ministers or deputy ministers. And so the way it has functioned in the past is once a program or priority or funding resolution or whatever is adopted by a government, it moves into the civil service for implementation. And it doesn't matter if the government changes and is less favorable and that's no longer a priority of the government, it still is being implemented. This last government was a little bit different. I mean, it's interesting because you sort of see the echoes of this sort of global right-wing movement where there was a lot of talk in Israel about rooting out the deep state, that the civil service was the enemy of the government, the enemy of the people because they're unelected and all of that sort of thing. And so a lot of our work shifted to trying to help the civil service, who are our close partners. They share values with us. It's like they share priorities, how to protect them and, hold this line between the political and professional levels within the ministries. And this was critically important, first around the shared learning initiative, which was one of the major achievements that was adopted. And then the other piece that was really important is that we had been working, actually starting with the previous Netanyahu government, with the Prime Minister's office, to develop a comprehensive plan to address the root causes of violence within Arab society. And this is a whole tangent, but just sort of the on one foot is, within Arab society, for a long time, the police have not really operated within Arab communities unless they're a threat to Jewish communities. And as a result, organized crime has proliferated within Arab communities in Israel. And young people, as you can imagine, a high proportion of them are not in school and not working, are, fertile ground for recruitment for the crime organizations. And so, till today, Arab citizens are overrepresented about 4 times what you'd expect as victims of violent crime from within their own community. So, Arab citizens are 20% of the population, 80% of the murder victims in Israel are Arab. And so we worked with the Prime Minister's office for this plan for how do you address the root causes, not just around enforcement, but things like economic inequality, educational disparities, access to financial services, recreational facilities, all these things. And in the government before last, the plan was fully adopted as a part of a 5-year funding plan that allocated 30 billion shekels to address the fundamental inequality between Jewish and Arab citizens in Israel. And so the last year has really been a fight to protect that funding. The new Minister of Finance is Bezalel Smotrich, whose economic policy, when he was asked, was following the Torah. He said that will lead to economic prosperity. And he's been doing a lot to try and take pieces of this funding to reallocate it to yeshiva students or the ultra-Orthodox or these sorts of things. So it's been a big fight to protect it. But on the whole, it's been successful thus far. And I think, with everything scrambled with the situation right now, we have no idea where, the politics will fall after this.
Yeah.
The piece about support for the projects, within Israeli society, people are becoming more and more receptive to the idea that we need equality. Part of this is thanks to Netanyahu in his previous governments, where he sort of first recognized that, it's not sustainable to have 20% of the population alienated from the economy. So the first real wave was an economic investment, an investment in higher education, trying to bring more Arab citizens into the workforce, which has largely been successful. On that side of the political map, there's been more resistance to things surrounding like social and political rights. But within Israeli society as a whole, people are moving in that direction. And I'll just sort of, as an example.
Yeah, what do you mean by social?
So social meaning like having, equal access to things like recreational facilities in different towns, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or, access to culture, like equal funding of the arts or representation in those sorts of things, or, these sorts of the softer things. But a good example of sort of how this trend is moving is, 5 years ago, when the last municipal elections in Israel happened, for the first time in Israel's history, all 7 of the mixed cities, which are communities, there's only 7 communities in Israel that have more than 10% of the population as non-Jewish. Everywhere else, it's changing. It's been changing a lot in the last 5 years, but everywhere else, people are living in segregated environments. In those mixed cities, for the first time, all of them elected city council coalitions that included parties representing Arab citizens, of residents of the cities, which was a huge shift in and of itself. When that happened, we started working, really ramping up our work in the mixed cities to try and promote these political partnerships and ensure their success. One of the first things we did was an in-depth survey of the residents of the mixed communities. And, people, sort of the conventional wisdom was that people live close to each other, but they are separate and they don't want anything to do with each other. There's hostility, all this sort of thing. But what we really found in the surveying residents is that that's not what people want. People want to figure out ways to live together. I mean, one of the really striking results that we found was, I mentioned this conventional wisdom about segregated education. We found that a strong majority of both Jewish and Arab parents wanted their kids to have the opportunity to learn in a bilingual, binational environment. And as a result, policy-wise, we're pushing hard to have one of those options, at least one of those options in every mixed community. But we're finding that more and more. Clearly, at moments like right now and like May of 21, there's a step back. But the question is how do we limit how far back we go and then take the experience of that, which is typically not a positive experience, I guess what we see clearly is, the negative path that Israeli society can go down. And how do we help support people that are looking to go in the other direction? And we're finding that the field is much stronger now than it has been in past times of polarization.
In these educational areas, are the Israelis learning Arabic, the Jewish Israelis learning Arabic, and the Arab Israelis learning Hebrew? I mean, people should know that there's three languages, Arabic, Hebrew, and English. All the signs in Israel are like that. But first of all, if you don't know English, in today's world, it hinders you in higher education and so on and so forth. So I'm just wondering, and I think it would promote some type of that people would be able to talk to one another if Israelis were learning Arabic.
No, it's a really good question, and it's a site of a really important development. I guess first I'd say that it's really important to note that in 2018, the Israeli government passed a law that has constitutional weight. In Israel, there's no constitution, but there's a set of laws that have constitutional weight called the nation state law, that previously Arabic was an official language in Israel. In 2018, the law that passed demoted Arabic to no longer being an official language in Israel. It did other things, like basically said that, we talk about this tension between the Jewishness of the state and democracy. It said for the first time that when they come into conflict, the Jewishness should be privileged. So this was a very difficult moment for Arab society within Israel, where sort of they felt like their status as second-class citizens was codified in law. That being said, for the Abraham initiatives, language has been really important in the education system. I described the shared learning initiative. The project before that we initiated and was eventually adopted was around spoken language. It was called Yasalam in the Jewish schools, and then it was called Ivrit B'Salam in the Arab schools. And what it did is, basically 15 years ago, we went to the Ministry of Education and we were like, what is going on with Arabic education? Like, you have all these kids coming out and they know zero Arabic. Like, there's hostility towards it. Like, what's going on? And we found out that basically all of the teachers that were teaching Arabic were Jewish, and they were teaching the formal written Arabic. Like, Arabic has different sort of dialects. There's the formal written called Fusha, which is like classical. It's like the equivalent of if you spoke using this language, it'd be like Shakespearean English. Like, you could understand it, but it's not really relevant. And then there's the spoken dialect, which there's different dialects based on region. And so we initiated this project in the Jewish schools. It was training and placing Arab citizens to teach a spoken Arabic curriculum that was relevant. And it was really important because it was like a more useful type of Arabic, but also it was providing role models from the other community for those Jewish kids, right? And then we initiated the mirror image program, training and placing Jewish teachers to teach spoken Hebrew in the Arabic school system. And this, about 10 years ago was adopted by the Ministry of Education. It's become the norm. There's challenges in the implementation, but it's become the norm that they move towards the spoken language. And this is for the elementary school kids. The shared learning I described is for middle school. And sort of the next stage that we're embarking on now is for high school students. And the idea is to have an interlocking set of interventions throughout the educational experience that disrupt the tendency towards isolation and the views that come with that from not being exposed to the other. I'll just say just one moment, because I think this would have been really relevant a month ago. I think it's still really relevant. The priority in the high school program, it really comes out of the last election in Israel. This government, I think it's safe to say, is the most extreme right-wing government in Israel's history. What a lot of people don't know is that this move to the right is being driven by young people. Israel is the only Western democracy where young people are significantly more right-wing than older folks. You have a situation, the statistic I think that really highlights this is that, Israel had 5 rounds of elections in 2.5 years. Between the first and the last of those 2.5 years, there were 400,000 young people that turned 18 and voted for the first time. 70% of them voted for this extreme government. So there really is this sharp shift to the right within the Jewish community. And this comes from, in the Jewish high schools, based on our experience and public opinion polling, they've really become this sort of echo chamber that facilitates these sort of extreme views around racism and xenophobia. And it comes from this sort of emotional preparation for going into the military, right? And then the Arab schools, you have a not exactly a mirror, but a parallel trend where Arab young people feel significantly more alienated from Israeli society than those that are older. And so they're not participating in the democratic process. And so in the high schools, we've embarked on this deep anti-racism education curriculum within the Jewish high schools, which doesn't exist. There's no anti-racism education in Israel up to this point. And then a civics engagement education program in the Arab high schools to try and facilitate for both of them a more positive interaction with the democratic process.
All right, I have a question from Evie, and then we'll get to Andy. From Evie, have you found movements within the schools, either in or out, before the last few weeks? Do people want to sign in or out? Can they? And can they? Is it by choice? Do the families socialize outside of school events? Good question.
Yeah. So what do you mean exactly by sign in or out? I guess I just want to make sure.
Like, I'm going to,
if you're a Jewish parent, can you send your kid to an Arab school if you're?
Yes.
So you can, technically you can. It's very limited, those that do that. For Jewish parents, they understand, quite clearly that the type of education you get in an Arab school is significantly worse than in a Jewish school. There's not the same level of resources. For Arab parents, for the vast majority, they live in communities that don't have Jewish schools. They live in segregated communities. And so it would mean, sending your kids far away from home in a language that they may not speak or be strong in. There isn't, the equivalent of ESL within the Jewish schools in order to bring kids into, it's immediately in Hebrew. And so it's very, very limited. It hasn't really been a thing. The thing about the socializing outside school events is really interesting. As a part of the shared learning program, in order to sort of smooth some of the potential resistance among parents, we've made an effort to facilitate opportunities for parents to meet each other, which has been more or less positive. But really what drives it is the young people. We have the kids and they start to develop these relationships, and all of a sudden they're doing things. A lot of it revolves around social media on TikTok and Instagram. They're doing things together. They're communicating with each other that way. We saw in May of 21, when the violence exploded in the mixed cities, we were really wary about bringing the kids back together. We thought that it was just too raw. The kids demanded it. They came to their teachers and they came to us and they said, we're worried about our friends from the other community. We want to get together. And they pushed us to do it much earlier than we thought. That was right. And it was great. They needed that for each other. So we've seen sort of the power of this. And I guess this sort of would lead me to say, this is sort of a big picture thing, but for us, what's really important is that, we view the relationships that are built as critical, but we view them as coming out of the structures that are shifting, right? You could bring kids from segregated schools together to do after school things and they could, play soccer or whatever, but then they're still going back into this other environment. What we want to do, and we think is more powerful, is to create a context where they're, like I said, meeting on equal footing, learning together, and then that facilitates these relationships that come naturally out of being in those environments that are stronger and more longstanding.
All right. Thank you. Andy, go ahead.
Hi, Jimmy. Good to see you. And that was heartwarming to hear that what actually happened between the kids. I like that. So this is a little bit different. How do you feel about the community here, the Jewish population in our country, where I have experienced militancy that I mean, this is a whole new ballgame for me. I talk to people on different issues, but and we're usually in agreement. It's outrageous, the Trumpers, this, that. But now I've been almost attacked.
Yeah.
Thinking I'm having a reasonable conversation, and it's not like that at all. And I'm wondering how you anticipate that affecting your work. It's really disturbing to me.
No, I'm definitely feeling that too. It's like such a tough environment. I feel like folks here a lot of the time feel like they're kind of given the choice of choosing a side, and then the implications of choosing a side can lead us to places that may. I was talking to someone a couple days ago, and they were saying they feel like the situation has led a lot of people in our community to sort of, it's not really that their values are becoming warped, but they're becoming pulled in a way that leads to an imbalance. And that where we may find ourselves in a few months, people may not feel comfortable with where they were now. I really find in my experience that folks that have the more relationships you have with people there, and the more closely you're leaning into that now, the more complicated you come out on these things, right? It's not as cut and dry because you understand how it impacts people in a range of ways. And so, as far as my work, working with folks here, we've really prioritized over the years that, like, from the perspective of fundraising, like this shouldn't be transactional. It's not like we're asking you to, write a check and then we'll come back to you in a year to write another check. Like, this is like becoming invested in a community that really is, it's Jewish and Arab, it's Israeli, it's American, it's British, it's like, and we all are benefiting from being in deep relationship with each other. And part of this, I alluded to this with the shared learning, right? It comes from a model from Northern Ireland, right? A lot of our work, we've been conversation around the anti-violence work with groups, in Chicago that are doing this type of work there, that seeing what we can take. And so there is this like binational in the sense of Jewish, Arab, and multinational in terms of Israeli and beyond. And I feel good about our immediate community that I'm not finding that sort of like this side or that side hostility erupting internally. But it is really concerning about beyond that. And so what we're really focused on is creating opportunities where our colleagues in Israel can share their experiences. It doesn't feel like we're forcing people to come to a conclusion, and the more that we can do that, I think the better we are. The challenge is, how do we get people that feel backed into a corner to be open enough to sort of open their hearts to hearing someone else's experience? It's a really hard thing. Has that been your experience, Andy, that like people that are more closely tied with folks there are a little bit more complicated, or is that not always the case for you?
It's possible, in the few, I think that may be one person's son goes to NYU and she has family. And I mean, one person said, this is how our family feels, and we still think we're humanitarian. I mean, it's sort of and it's, I would have no issues with these people on other fronts, anything. But I've just been really kind of bowled over, that I have to really think differently as and I haven't even initiated some of these. They've just come out.
Yeah, it's unavoidable.
Yeah, and that and I know that we cannot, deal with extremes. You have to find, the center and work from there. So, I cannot even in a position or a thought to, but it's just sort of it's coming out of the walls, kind of like there's permission out of hate or something.
Well, it's like almost, it's not so much political. It's like having the capacity to keep your heart open enough to feel the suffering that goes beyond your own community, which is really hard, but it's just so massive right now. I guess that's what we're kind of looking for.
It must be if I've had it happen. That's why I'm thinking, God, this must be everywhere. And what is it? What is the impact? I'm only one person with, a few interactions, and
Yeah.
um,
I think, like from an organizational perspective, the fact, like I said, that UJA included like the fabric of Israeli society as a priority, an emergency priority, like the more, and I think for all of us here, if this is something that appeals for you, the more that we can push our communities to consider the fabric of Israeli society, the relationship between people as a priority, like specifically during this moment, I think it helps us create an environment on the other side that we're set up more positively for a different reality. Yeah.
I think that, when we started this morning, and Jimmy and I have been talking, for 6 months, and then the war broke out, we're talking more. And then this morning, I was worried, but I feel better. I feel like I can take a breath. And I think it was a great session. Thank you. I'm very passionate about Jewish education, Israel education. And I think one of the things that I stress is you have to tell your story. You can't say to me, I'm feeling bad. I have a cousin who was called up from Elohim for reserves. You can't say that's not true.
Right.
That's true. And I can't say that your colleagues, he had 11 people in his family have died. I can't say that's not true. It's true. So I do think that telling your story and listening to other people and hearing each other's stories is where we're at. And I think your Abraham Initiatives, you're doing a fabulous job. And I thank you for coming on this morning. And we will have you back next year, and we can see what's happening. And listen, kol hakavod to you, UJA in New York, for giving you money, because right now they're probably taking in literally millions, if not billions. And at least they realize that this is a goal, and this is, they value it, and they, where they give money is where they value the initiative. So, any other last questions? Very, very quickly. Next week, we have Rabbi Josh Fagelson. He's doing Eternal Questions. He said he emailed me. He said, "Am I still on?" I said, "You're still on. We have lots of bagels. We're in person." I said, "But Israel will be the elephant in the room." And I think as the war keeps going on, Jim Kenney is coming November 12th. I mean, until the war is over. And I don't even know how that can be at this point, but we will be gathering, we'll be talking about it. November 19th, we have a field trip to the Free Will Good Hope Baptist Church in Chicago, and promoting conversation with our friends there. There'll be a bus, which you need to sign up for, and I will get that all out to everybody. And this is until March 10th, but we are going to go as a congregation to the Holocaust Museum to see the Delhi exhibit with their best docent, Jim Schuster. I'm not saying, he didn't pay me to say that. And so, come with us in March. And if you have questions about anything, see me. Jimmy, thank you. What a great morning.
Thank you so much for having me. Rich and Andy, thank you for making this happen. Vanessa, thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.